Hey YouTube, Ben from the future here, and just wanted to make a quick little announcement and apology. Sorry in advance for the glare. I got to the site a little bit late, and I was rushed for time in terms of setup. Little apologies there. Hopefully everything turns out okay after post. Secondly, the announcements. If you haven't checked out the Happy New Year announcement video for 2024, I highly suggest that you check it out. It just has a little bit of a plan for January and early February, and it has two sub goals. So once we get to 600 subs and then 1,000 subs, there's going to be two separate giveaways. So if you want to know what we're giving away, check out the video there. Hope you enjoy the coverage. I'm definitely a little bit out of practice, so hope you guys enjoy nonetheless. Happy 2024 Legacy community. We're going to start the year off strong, covering the Legacy side event at the face-to-face tour in Toronto. I'm gonna apologize for this round one match. There's gonna be a lot of glare. I'm gonna do my best to do up digital cards so that everyone knows what's going on and has all the information on the screen. But I was quite rushed in setting up the feature match. I kind of got there a little bit late. Anywho, we have Elliot on player one side playing Boros Initiative, and then we have Chris playing Doomsday on player two side. Both have beautiful mats. Elliot using the Legacy of the North mat, and Chris using the Legacy Championship mat from this year's Eternal Weekend. I believe Chris won the die roll and will be going first. We get a really good peek at Elliot's hand. There's double Archon, Ancient Tomb, Seasoned Engineer, Lotus Petal, Plains, and a Fable of Mirror Breaker. Chris gonna start off with a Bayou into Thoughtseize. Again, Elliot revealing Fable, Plains, Lotus Petal, Ancient Tomb, Seasoned Engineer, and two Archon of Amiria. So Chris, I think the hardest thing for Chris to deal with is the Archon of Amiria's, but Elliot does have the backup Archon just in case. Looks like he's gonna take the Lotus Petal to prevent additional plays. I guess he could stop the Seasoned Engineer on turn 2, but or sorry, the Archon on turn 1. It would have been Ancient Tomb, Lotus Petal into Archon. Elliot top decks a Cavern of Souls. Elliot most likely just going to lean on the plains and just pass the turn. Chris is going to draw for turn. It's like it was a Street Wraith from what I can tell. Gonna play a Polluted Delta. Yep, cycle the Street Wraith that he just drew. Going to crack the Polluted Delta. Most likely gonna go into either a Ponder or a Brainstorm. Although, if he does go into the Brainstorm, where he's already used one Shuffle effect for the Polluted Delta, so not the strongest play, but we'll see what happens. There's an Underground Sea, casting the Brainstorm. So he's drawn Lotus Petal Island, and I'm not sure what the first card he drew was. He's putting the island back. And couldn't get a glimpse of that one either. Plays of the Lotus Petal. Gonna try to avoid the Archon of Amiria attacks. So get out the spells that he can now. It's not like he's Storm, so he just needs to get the triple black for Doomsday. Down comes Archon of Amiria. There's a Daze returning the Underground Sea. Archon of Amiria gets countered. Gonna pass the turn. Chris going to cycle the Lorien Revealed, finding a second Underground Sea. Elliot holding a Cavern of Souls that he drew last turn. Not sure what he drew for the turn this time around. Alright, Chris generous enough to show that we know of the two Underground Seas in his hand. There's a Doomsday in his hands. Not sure. He should probably just fire it off. I don't think there's anything that the initiative deck can do to disrupt just hard casting the Doomsday. So cracking it for 1 black. There's a Dark Ritual into Doomsday. I'm gonna apologize in advance. I'm really bad at Doomsday. I'm I have no idea the lines that can be done, but I think they've been pretty much simplified ever since okay, I say simplified, but I mean compared to what Doomsday players used to need to do. Ever since the printing of Thassa's Oracle, but almost every line ends in Thassa's Oracle. It's the easiest way to just end the game outright. So Chris gonna exile the graveyard and his deck. Didn't take anything out of the graveyard, just everything came straight from the deck. Doomsday will resolve and go to the graveyard. Chris still floating 2 black mana and still has an Underground Sea in the hand. Okay, so he's gonna cast a Brainstorm using the last Underground Sea. Draws 3 cards. There's an Edge of Autumn, a Consider, and a Lion's Eye Diamond. Gonna put back 2 cards. Play Lion's Eye Diamond, cycle, cracking the Lion's Eye for probably 3 blue. So he is sacrificing the Underground Sea to the Edge of Autumn to draw a card, holding priority. He's going to sack the Lion's Eye Diamond, uses 1 blue mana to get the Consider. Going to ditch the Underground Sea that he had in the hand, going to draw a card off the Consider. There's the Edge of Autumn, and then he still has 2 blue floating mana from the Lion's Eye Diamond. So that is a perfect pile there. Chris finds his way to victory, so he will be up 1 game. Okay, so players are done sideboarding. We are going into game number 2. Chris drawing his initial 7. Going to bypass a little bit of the etiquette here. Generally, when you're playing, when you're down a game, your opponent will most likely be taking game 1. And they should be announcing whether or not they're keeping their hand first. Chris just gonna speed it up. He's already shown or told Elliot that he's taking a mulligan, so he's down to 6 cards. Alright, so Elliot going to draw, I believe, his initial 7. There's a Plateau, Null Rod, Ancient Tomb, Caves of Chaos Adventurer, Anointed Peacekeeper, a second Null Rod, and a Cabinet of Souls. Oh no, it's a Chalice, sorry. So Elliot keeping his 7, and Chris keeping his 6. There's going to be a Chalice on 1, although I don't think it's going to resolve here. There's a Force of Negation. Alright, Chris taking his turn. There's a Misty Rainforest. Going to cast a Ponder. Elliot in a pretty good position here with his Anointed Peacekeeper on turn 2. Then he can check to see what's going on in Chris's hand. Unless Chris goes Lotus Petal, Dark Ritual, Doomsday right now. I guess the downside of going the Peacekeeper plan is if Chris has the accelerated mana in Lotus Petal or like, I don't think he would need to worry about Lion's Eye Diamond. Lion's Eye Diamond is probably in the end pile to just get the extra mana to cast Thassa's Oracle. But if Chris is leaning on the Lotus Petals, then the Null Rod coming down on turn 3 might be too late. Elliot kept in Solitudes. Gonna play out the Peacekeeper here. See what's going on. There is 3 lands and a Lotus Petal. So this Null Rod is looking very good now. However, I guess not very good. It's just decent, I guess. Because there is a lot of mana in Chris's hand. Although the Lotus Petal is representing the 3rd source of black mana. It's useless for Peacekeeper to name Lotus Petal, so looks like he's just going to tax the Doomsday, which is probably the best call. Out comes Lotus Petal, down comes Underground Sea, passes the turn back to Elliot. Elliot going to untap and draw for the turn. There's a second Null Rod. Alright, I think... So here, Elliot has a choice of playing the Caves of Chaos Adventure or one of the Null Rods. I would most likely play one of the Null Rods. Just keep the game a little bit slow. Like, Chris is not representing a very fast clock unless he top decks Doomsday. But playing the Null Rod shuts off that line. Unless the card that Chris has also drawn last turn that we don't know of. If that's a Dark Ritual or Doomsday, then Elliot could be in trouble. Elliot chooses to play both Null Rods. I don't think it's advantageous in any way. He could just be playing it. He could have saved 2 life. Um, yeah. Okay, so Chris just playing his lands and passing the turn. There's a useless Lotus Petal in the face of 2 Null Rods from Elliot. I think he can just slam a Caves of Chaos Adventure here and just start winning the game here. Introduce initiative to the game. So I'm gonna find the planes. Going to play the. Looks like he's playing it for turn. Not a problem. And then in comes Anointed Peacekeeper for 3. Brings Chris down to 13. Chris gonna draw the card and play a Tropical Island. Does he have any action here? So just if you guys are tuning in, the card with all of the glare all over it is the Undercity. I'm not gonna throw a digital card up, I don't think. It doesn't matter. Okay, well, initiative triggers. Elliot went to Forge, put 2 counters on the Anointed Peacekeeper, and then draws for his turn. He's gonna swing in for 10. Triggers the Caves of Chaos Adventurer, revealing a Lotus Petal. Drops Chris down to 3. Elliot will then cast the Lotus Petal and pass the turn. So he drew Simian Spirit Guide for the turn, and Chris is just going to scoop it up. Curious to know what the cards that he drew were. Okie dokie, we are starting round 3 here. Elliot on Boros Initiative versus Chris on Doomsday. It doesn't look like it's Turbo Doomsday. It looks like he can play like this lower game if he really wants to. But we are going to resolve mulligans here. Elliot revealing Solitude, City of Traders, Caves of Chaos Adventurers, City of Traders, Ancient Tomb, Null Rod, Fable of the Mirror Breaker. This is not a great hand. Both players are going to ship it, immediately go to 6. I think the problem with that hand was like you had double City of Traders. Like it's okay that you have an Ancient Tomb, but you don't really have a lot of colors, and your only actionable spell was a Null Rod. So hoping to draw a mana source is not what you want to be doing in initiative. It is a stompy deck, so it kind of does struggle on the mana side until you actually start triggering initiative where you can find like a basic land. I apologize to any Doomsday players watching. I would give more insight, but I'm completely terrible at combo decks, so you guys, if you have comments, post them in the comment box so I can learn. But yeah, we're gonna see Chris go down to 5 immediately. Elliot pondering over his 6. Looks like you're gonna keep it and going to ditch a Solitude to the bottom. So he is keeping Ancient Tomb, Chalice of the Void, Cavern of Souls, Chrome Mox, Archon, Archon. So this is an amazing hand because he can turn 1 Archon or turn 1 Chalice. I think because he's on the draw, playing the turn 1 Chalice might be a little bit more effective. It's debatable. Archon is like an extremely strong card. It stops Chris from drawing multiple cards per turn. I actually think I might lean on turn 1 Archon over the turn 1 Chalice. Because if Chris is able to set up a Doomsday, then he can get around casting 1 mana spells, I believe. Like he can just use a lot of the cyclers. Ooh, there's a Thoughtseize right off the bat from Chris. So very good start. He gets to see what the hate cards are. Again, sorry for the glare. Digital cards will be up there. But I think Chris is just gonna take the Chalice. If he has, because so if Chris takes the Chalice, then Elliot needs to ditch an Archon to cast the Archon to have a turn 1 play. So if Chris can deal with the Archon that's being played, then it gets really, really hard for Elliot. Although, if you're Elliot, like, you have to kind of... if you're in Elliot's position, you have to weigh whether, or you have to consider whether or not Chris has a Force of Will or a Daze. There's two ways that Elliot can do this. He can either turn one Archon and try to be really aggressive. If he does that, and it turns out that Chris doesn't have an answer for that Archon, it can be extremely backbreaking for Chris because he's on the mulligan to 5. He just needs so much time to recover. Although Elliot doesn't have a ton of pressure to follow up from what we can see. So I think Elliot here is depending on whether or not to give Chris a turn. So let's see what Chris does. There's a Dark Ritual. I think there's a Doomsday.
Oh my god!
That was a little bit of insight from Elliot. But yeah, that's a very good 5 from Chris. Whether or not any of them are top decked, I would have to double check. So Elliot expressing his frustration because he did decide to give Chris an extra turn by not trying to jam out an Archon. But we still don't know what those last 2 cards are in Chris's hand. So we're gonna see. This is not looking good for Elliot. He drew a plateau. Yeah, so this is not looking good for Elliot. Looks like Chris has settled on his 5. It was pretty quick. There's a lot of the Force of Wills. There's 3 Force of Wills that we saw. Sorry, I wasn't looking for Force of Negations either. So there is a Force of Will in Chris's hand then. Ooh, there's a top deck Magus. This is the way to stop Chris if he doesn't have a Lotus Petal or an island in his pile. So Elliot plays Cavern of Souls into Magus because we know, like, Elliot has looked at Chris's deck and he only saw 3 Force of Wills in the deck. So that means Chris has a Force of Will in his hand. Or in the deck, I guess. But there's no way that Chris would include a Force of Will in his pile if he's trying to win extremely quickly. So the odds are Chris has the Force of Will in his hand and most likely another blue spell. Because it's either blue or black spell, because Chris didn't play a land in the last turn. He just went Dark Ritual Doomsday. Now comes Cavern, most likely naming human. Goes down to 18 from the Ancient Tomb. There's a Magus. And does Chris have a way to get double blue? So again, Chris needs Lotus Petal, Lion's Eye Diamond, like a Lion's Eye Diamond line, or looks like he's conceding. He did have the Force of Negation, Force of Will in his hand. Looks like the pile is Island on the top. So only one source of blue looks like it. Because there's double Edge of Autumn and Street Wraith. So Elliot will take it over Chris 2-1. Alright guys. See you for round 2.